The courtroom was a cavern of polished oak and quiet tension. Sunlight streamed through tall, narrow windows, throwing long shadows across the gleaming floor. Dust motes floated lazily in the golden light, catching the faint smell of old wood and polish. Rows of benches were occupied by spectators, each one whispering quietly, trying not to disturb the proceedings, their murmurs blending into a constant low hum. Some faces were anxious, others bored, some curious. All eyes, sooner or later, drifted toward the front where the judge sat, imposing and serious, a symbol of authority. His gavel rested beside him, polished and gleaming, waiting to call order at the slightest infraction. At the front of the courtroom, the judge presided over the day's session with practiced precision. He was a man of middle age, graying at the temples, his robes crisp and solemn. Behind him, the flag of the United States hung tall and proud, a silent reminder of the law's weight in this room. To his right sat the court reporter, fingers poised over the stenograph machine, capturing every syllable, every hesitation, every whispered aside. To his left, the defendant's attorneys leaned over stacks of documents, flipping through files, muttering quietly in an attempt to prepare for the next exchange. Their faces were masks of focus, but their eyes flickered nervously toward their client. The defendant himself was a man in his late 30s, dressed in a dark suit that hung slightly loosely over his frame. His hair was slicked back, and he wore glasses that reflected the overhead lights. From his posture and nervous twitches, it was clear he was not at ease. He fidgeted with his pen, tapping it repeatedly against the edge of the table, his eyes darting toward the spectators and occasionally toward the K-9 unit at the back of the room. He tried to maintain composure, but a bead of sweat traced the side of his temple, betraying his inner turmoil. Standing along the walls were several officers, some armed, others simply observing. Their presence was subtle but commanding. Among them, the K-9 handler leaned slightly against the wall, his German shepherd, a black and tan dog with sharp eyes and a muscular frame, sitting attentively at his side. The dog's ears twitched occasionally, sensing the energy in the room. It was clear to anyone paying attention that the animal was not merely decorative. It was trained for detection, for reading the invisible signals that humans often missed. The handler's posture was relaxed but alert, fingers lightly resting on the leash, ready to act at a moment's notice. Near the back, almost invisible in comparison to the weighty figures around him, sat a small child. She was a little girl of perhaps 7 or 8, with dark brown hair tied into 2 uneven braids that swung gently as she shifted in her seat. She clutched a small, worn backpack against her chest, a gift from her grandmother that she had insisted on bringing even to this serious place. Her feet barely touched the floor, and she kept them tucked neatly beneath her, rocking slightly with the restless energy only children possess. Her large, hazel eyes were fixed not on the judge or the lawyers, but on the K-9 at the back of the room. The girl's guardian, a woman in her early 30s, sat beside her. She was well-dressed but wore an expression of fatigue and concern. Every so often she leaned down to whisper a reminder to the child, "Stay still, be quiet, look at the judge, not around the room." But the little girl's attention was elsewhere. Her gaze was intense, almost unnerving in its focus. While adults often overlooked details, assuming they were inconsequential, the child noticed subtleties. The way the K-9 shifted its weight slightly, the barely perceptible flare of its nostrils, the subtle tightening of its muscles as if responding to some unseen signal. The courtroom itself was filled with small sensory details that the adults filtered out, but the girl absorbed like a sponge. She noticed the faint smell of polished wood mixed with the subtle, almost metallic scent of ink from the court reporter's machine. She felt the draft that slipped through the tall windows, carrying whispers from the hallway outside. She saw the flicker of light on the eyeglasses of the defendant, the slight crease that formed when he tried to suppress a frown. All of these details formed a tapestry of reality in her mind, but her attention remained on the K-9. Around her, the courtroom was a study in contrast, Adults sat rigidly, trying to maintain composure, but their minds wandered. Some were preoccupied with the implications of the trial, others with personal matters, and some simply with boredom. Lawyers whispered back and forth in low tones, flipping through files, occasionally making notes on pads. The judge's gavel struck sharply once, demanding attention, and for a brief moment, the room froze in collective awareness before slowly sinking back into murmured conversation. The energy in the room was a mixture of anticipation, tension, and subdued excitement, the kind that only a high-profile trial could generate. The little girl, however, remained unaffected by the routine formalities. Her focus was absolute. She had a knack for observing details, for noticing things that others dismissed. She noticed the K-9's subtle shifts in stance whenever someone approached, the way it would lift its head slightly and sniff the air as if reading an invisible map of scents and intentions. She felt a strange connection to the dog, an unspoken recognition of its purpose. It was as if both of them shared a secret that the adults around them could not perceive. Her guardian, sensing her intensity, tried to redirect her attention. "Look at me," she whispered softly. "Pay attention to the judge." But the child's eyes never left the K-9. She leaned slightly to one side, whispering words that no one else could hear. Her lips barely moved, but there was an urgency in her tone that made the guardian uneasy. She glanced nervously at the officers nearby, wondering if they noticed the girl's behavior, but the adults were too engrossed in the proceedings to pay attention. The K-9 handler, standing near the back, occasionally adjusted the dog's posture, murmuring calm instructions that only the dog could understand. The animal responded instantly, muscles coiling and relaxing with precision. The handler's gaze swept the room occasionally, noting the positions of witnesses, lawyers, and the judge. He did not notice the little girl at first. She was small, tucked away in her seat, seemingly insignificant in the grand scheme of the courtroom. Yet in moments like this, small observations could have outsized consequences. The room was silent for a long stretch, punctuated only by the tapping of pens, the occasional cough, and the judge's voice explaining procedural matters. Yet in that silence, tension built like a storm gathering off the horizon. Every movement, every glance, every sound was magnified in the girl's awareness. She noticed the subtle signs of nervousness in the defendant, the way his fingers twitched when he reached for his pen, the way his eyes darted toward the door as if imagining an escape. These were details the adults saw but ignored. To her, they formed a narrative that needed no explanation. The spectators, unaware of the girl's silent vigilance, continued to murmur softly. Some were trying to follow the legal arguments, others simply curious about the drama unfolding before them. Cameras clicked occasionally, journalists capturing faces and expressions, while the judge occasionally lifted his gavel to demand order. The room was a microcosm of tension, authority, and expectation, a place where every action had weight and consequence. Yet amid all this, the little girl's mind worked differently, absorbing the invisible threads that connected people, scent, and movement in ways adults could not understand. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and still the girl's gaze did not waver from the K-9. She shifted slightly, leaning forward, her small hand gripping the edge of her seat. She noticed the subtle changes in the dog's expression, the way it sniffed slightly, the tiny flecks of its claws against the floor. Each small signal told her something about the room, about the people in it, about the events that had transpired and those yet to unfold. It was a quiet understanding, a silent conversation between her and the K-9 that no one else perceived. Even the air seemed to vibrate with anticipation. The temperature, the faint sounds from the street outside, the soft creaking of the courtroom benches, all contributed to a heightened sense of awareness. The girl breathed shallowly, attuned to rhythms and movements others missed. Her guardian noticed her unusual stillness, a stark contrast to the typical restlessness of children, and felt a chill run down their spine. Something about the child's focus was unnerving, almost prescient. As the judge called for the next witness, the girl's attention remained on the K-9. She did not flinch as the attorneys rose, did not glance toward the judge, did not react to the subtle shuffle of papers. Her mind was entirely on the dog and the invisible story it seemed to be telling her. There was an intensity in her gaze, a quiet determination that suggested she understood more than anyone in the room realized. And so the courtroom continued, a place of power, tension, and observation where every detail mattered. But in the midst of authority and routine, a little girl sat quietly, eyes fixed, mind alert, ready for a moment that no one else anticipated, a moment that would soon break the ordinary rhythm of the courtroom and change everything. While the courtroom remained tense with formalities, the little girl's attention had shifted entirely to the K9. Every movement, every subtle twitch, every flicker of the dog's ears was etched into her mind. To the adults, it was just a well-trained animal, a silent companion to the officer who had brought it. But to her, the K9 was more than that. It was a living signal, a detector of truths invisible to ordinary human eyes. Her hazel eyes followed its every twitch, the subtle tension in its muscles, and the way its tail shifted, sometimes in anticipation, sometimes in a restrained alert. She noticed details others would miss completely. The K9's nose twitched ever so slightly, sniffing the air, catching scents too faint for anyone else to perceive. The little girl leaned slightly forward in her seat, her small hands clutching her backpack tightly. She didn't feel fear. Instead, she felt a strange certainty, an intuitive understanding that the dog was reacting to something important, something hidden from the adults. The air itself seemed charged with this secret, vibrating faintly with tension, and she sensed it keenly. Her guardian, seated beside her, tried quietly to redirect her attention. "Sweetheart, focus on the judge, eyes forward. No pointing," she whispered, nudging the girl gently. But the child's gaze remained unwavering. Her eyes were locked on the K9 with the intensity of someone trying to read an invisible message. Her mind worked in a different way. She noticed sequences, patterns, small behaviors that adults unconsciously filtered out. She saw the slight, almost imperceptible flex of the dog's muscles when the defendant shifted in his seat, the way it subtly adjusted its posture when the attorneys leaned forward. The courtroom noises, the shuffle of papers, whispered conversations, the soft tap of pens, were all background static to her focused observation. Each sound seemed to amplify the signals she was detecting. She could almost feel the invisible threads connecting the defendant to the evidence in ways that adults dismissed as coincidence. Her lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to speak, but she remembered her guardian's warning to be quiet. So she simply leaned closer, studying, analyzing, connecting dots invisible to everyone else. Even the K9 handler began to notice subtle reactions from the dog, though he was not yet aware of the child's attention. The dog occasionally raised its head, nostrils flaring, tail stiffening for a brief moment, then relaxing again. Experienced as he was, the handler interpreted these as typical shifts in alertness during a tense environment. He couldn't have known that a small, quiet observer at the back of the room was decoding signals with astonishing clarity, noticing things his trained eye might overlook. The little girl's mind worked in layers. She not only observed the dog but also the interactions around it, the defendant's nervous glances, the subtle shifting in his chair, the slight tension in the attorney's shoulders. She noticed how the K9's brief, almost imperceptible flinch corresponded with a small, nervous flick of the defendant's hand. Her child's mind, untethered by assumptions about adult logic, began forming connections. The dog's instinctive responses aligned with human anxiety and unspoken guilt. Each flicker and twitch painted a picture she could almost see fully, though she had no words to explain it yet. Time seemed to stretch strangely for her. Minutes dragged like hours, and yet she felt the passage of events in an entirely different way. The courtroom, with its solemnity and authority, existed almost as a backdrop to the drama she was quietly witnessing in miniature. The silent conversation between the dog and the defendant, a dance of hidden truths and unspoken signals. Each slight movement of the dog was a word, each sniff a sentence, and she was absorbing it all, a silent witness to a truth that had eluded everyone else. Her curiosity heightened when the K9 suddenly stiffened more noticeably, head raised, ears pricked forward. The dog's gaze fixed on the defendant, its body taut with alertness. The handler adjusted his stance, hands firm on the leash, eyes scanning the defendant for a reason behind the sudden tension. The courtroom remained oblivious to the significance of the dog's behavior. Adults were absorbed in procedure, paperwork, and whispered conversations. But the little girl felt a jolt of recognition in her chest, as though she had seen this exact stance somewhere before, in a situation that had troubled her young mind. Her fingers tightened on her backpack, and she leaned slightly closer to her guardian. Her small voice whispered almost unintelligibly, "He's hiding at sea." Her lips barely moved, and the guardian thought she had imagined it at first, but the intensity in her eyes and the slight tremor of excitement made it impossible to ignore. Something inside her insisted that she was seeing something crucial, something that everyone else in the courtroom was blind to. She felt the weight of the truth pressing on her, demanding attention. The guardian looked around, hoping no one else had noticed the girl's whispered words. The courtroom's adults were fully engaged in their roles, oblivious to the tiny observer at the back. Yet a creeping unease settled in the guardian's chest. How could a child, so small, so seemingly insignificant, notice details that had eluded trained adults? And why did her certainty feel so absolute, so unshakable? The child's focus, so intense and precise, was unsettling in a way that made the guardian both proud and anxious. The little girl's mind continued to connect threads. She remembered the scent she had noticed days earlier on the defendant during a brief encounter near her home, a faint, peculiar odor she associated with certain objects. The K9 was now reacting to that same, barely perceptible scent. She felt the connection without fully understanding why. The dog had detected what she had sensed, and her intuition had led her here to this courtroom, at this precise moment. It was almost magical in its precision, yet entirely logical to her young mind. Her attention to detail extended beyond the K9 and the defendant. She observed the tiny quirks in everyone else's behavior, the way the attorneys shifted nervously when the judge's gaze landed on them, the subtle tapping of a foot beneath a bench, the barely perceptible glance exchanged between two witnesses. Each small signal added to the complex narrative unfolding before her. And yet all of it circled back to one center. The K9, poised like a silent sentinel, whose instinctive reaction spoke a language she alone seemed to understand. The courtroom's tension seemed to intensify as the proceedings continued. The judge's voice carried authority, calling witnesses, prompting lawyers for clarification, maintaining strict adherence to procedure. But the little girl's world existed in layers beneath this formal narrative. She felt the pulse of truth in the room, the currents of guilt and innocence that no adult could perceive in their official roles. Each minute, each gesture, each subtle signal reinforced her certainty. Something critical was unfolding, and the K9 was at the center of it. At one point, the K9 twitched again, subtly, its head shifting slightly toward a corner of the courtroom. The handler moved instinctively, scanning for a potential threat or distraction, but found nothing obvious. To everyone else, it was a minor shift, nothing significant. To the little girl, it was a sign, a confirmation of her intuition. Her heart pounded with the thrill of understanding, the kind of exhilaration that comes when a young mind glimpses a truth others cannot see. She whispered again, barely audible, he's there, hiding it." Her guardian's hand squeezed hers lightly, a mixture of caution and encouragement. "Shh," the guardian urged softly. "Wait, don't say anything." But the child's eyes remained fixed, unwavering, alive with an intensity that was almost frightening. It was a kind of awareness that transcended words, a silent communion with the K9, an understanding of the hidden patterns that adults ignored or dismissed. Minutes turned into hours in her perception, though only moments had passed for the adults. Every twitch of the dog, every flinch of the defendant, every flicker of movement in the courtroom was catalogued in her mind with meticulous care. She felt like an invisible observer of a drama that no one else could fully perceive. Her whispers grew more insistent internally, forming phrases she did not speak aloud but that resonated with urgency. "Watch. Look. It's him. He can't hide it." As the judge called for the next witness, the little girl shifted slightly, leaning forward in anticipation. The K-9's eyes remained fixed on the defendant, muscles coiled, ready to react at the slightest provocation. The handler adjusted his grip, unaware of the silent observer at the back whose mind was connecting dots faster than any adult could. The little girl's focus was absolute, her intuition clear, and her certainty unshakable. In her quiet way, she understood something profound. The K-9 had seen what others could not, and together they were about to change the course of the trial. And so, amid the stately formality of the courtroom, the whispers of papers, the low hum of voices, and the stern presence of the judge, the little girl sat quietly. She was a small figure with enormous awareness, a witness in every sense, poised on the edge of revelation. Her attention never wavered from the K-9, whose every twitch, sniff, and glance carried significance that only she could perceive. And as the proceedings continued, the invisible threads of truth, guilt, and detection were beginning to converge, threads that would soon lead to a moment no one in the courtroom would ever forget. The little girl's focus on the K-9 did not waver as the courtroom carried on with its official business. Every adult around her was absorbed in the formalities, the judge calling witnesses, lawyers flipping through stacks of papers, reporters clicking pens and cameras. But to her, the real story was unfolding silently, invisibly in the subtle signals that no one else seemed to notice. The dog's muscles coiled and relaxed with precision, nostrils flaring faintly as if reading secrets from the air. Her mind processed these movements instinctively, associating them with faint memories, scents, and emotions she could not fully articulate. Her guardian, noticing the intensity of the child's gaze, leaned closer and whispered, "Sweetheart, focus on the judge, please. Don't stare like that." But the little girl barely acknowledged her words. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her small fingers gripping the edge of her backpack. Her lips moved in the faintest whisper, just audible to herself and her guardian, but the urgency behind it was unmistakable. "He's hiding it. He's hiding it there," she murmured, her words trembling slightly with a mixture of fear and certainty. The guardian's eyes widened. Could it be possible that the child was referring to the defendant? The words were too vague, too cryptic to make sense at first, but there was something in her voice, in the determination in her eyes, that made it impossible to dismiss. Her gaze remained fixed on the K-9, and the guardian followed her line of sight. They noticed the dog's tail stiffen, the slight upward lift of its head, the way it positioned its body in a subtle, alert stance. A chill ran down the guardian's spine. Something was happening, and the little girl had noticed it before anyone else. In that moment, the little girl leaned closer to her guardian and whispered again, her voice just audible enough for one careful adult to hear. "See how he smells the thing he touched. He thinks no one saw, but the dog knows." The guardian froze. Their heart thumped in their chest. Could a child, so young, so small, truly understand what was unfolding? The sheer clarity in her tone, the absolute certainty in her expression, was disarming. It was as if she had a sixth sense, one that adults, with all their experience and training, lacked. The guardian gently squeezed her shoulder. "What are you saying, sweetheart?" they asked softly, trying to mask the tremor in their voice. The little girl did not respond immediately. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, pointing a small finger in the direction of the K-9 and the defendant. Her hazel eyes glimmered with intensity. "There," she whispered, "right there. He touched it, and the dog smells it." The words barely registered to anyone else in the courtroom. Adults around her were focused elsewhere, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding at the back. But to the guardian, it was impossible to ignore. Something in the air shifted. Perhaps it was the child's unwavering certainty, or the way her words seemed to carry weight far beyond their volume. The guardian glanced nervously at the officers standing along the walls. Could they hear her? Would they think she was imagining things? They hesitated, but the little girl's eyes locked onto the K9 and her lips moved once more, whispering the same observation. The smell, he's hiding it. The dog knows. That single repeated phrase carried an urgency that demanded attention, even if it was subtle enough to be missed by others. The K9, in the meantime, remained alert. Its ears twitched at regular intervals, nostrils flaring faintly, muscles tensing and relaxing in response to stimuli invisible to the courtroom's human occupants. The little girl noticed every nuance. She could tell, instinctively, that the dog was sensing something tied to the defendant, something specific and tangible. She did not fully understand the mechanics. She could not articulate the science behind scent detection, but she knew the truth of what the dog was communicating. It was not imagination. It was fact. Her guardian's fingers trembled slightly as they processed the implications. A child had noticed something the adults had overlooked. Their heart raced. Should they say something? Would anyone believe them? The courtroom was a place of order and procedure, not intuition. Yet here was a child, small and quiet, whispering words that aligned perfectly with the K9's reactions. The guardian risked a glance toward the officers nearby. One of them, a middle-aged man with a steady posture, was watching the proceedings closely, though his attention was elsewhere. The guardian leaned slightly, whispering to him just in case. The officer paused. He bent slightly toward the guardian and whispered back. "What did she say?" The guardian relayed the child's words carefully, watching the officer's expression shift from polite disinterest to cautious curiosity. The K9 handler, noticing the subtle interaction, finally glanced toward the girl. He observed the intensity in her eyes and the direction of her small finger. At first he was skeptical. After all, children often imagine or exaggerate. But there was something in her voice, in the precision of her gaze, that caught his attention. The dog's behavior now seemed slightly different, more focused, as if confirming the girl's observation. The courtroom continued around them. Lawyers consulted papers, the judge's voice rang out in commands, and the defendant shifted nervously in his chair. But all of that seemed distant to the little girl and her guardian. The girl leaned closer, whispering again, her words urgent but controlled. "The dog, it knows. He touched it there. I saw him." Her tone was steady despite the tension, conveying clarity and authority beyond her years. The guardian felt a mix of awe and fear. They had never witnessed such an acute observation from a child. The officer bent closer to the little girl. "Can you show me?" he asked quietly. She nodded slightly, though not fully understanding the formalities of the law or the courtroom. Her understanding was instinctive, immediate, and pure. She pointed subtly in the direction where the defendant had handled the object that had gone missing, a corner of the room near the defendant's table. Her finger trembled slightly, betraying her nervousness, but her eyes were steady. The K9's ears twitched once more, nostrils flaring. The child's observation and the dog's instinct aligned perfectly, a silent confirmation in the midst of the procedural chaos. Her whisper, repeated just once more for emphasis, finally caused the officer to act. He signaled to the handler and subtly indicated that the dog should investigate. The K9 responded instantly, moving with practiced precision, muscles coiling and relaxing as it approached the indicated area. The courtroom seemed oblivious to this small action. Lawyers argued quietly among themselves, spectators whispered, and the judge consulted his notes. Yet at the back of the room, a small figure and a large dog were converging on the invisible truth, a truth no adult had fully recognized until this moment. The little girl's heart pounded. She had done nothing wrong, nothing extraordinary, only observed. Yet the weight of what she was witnessing made her feel important, significant, and strangely responsible. She whispered again, almost to herself this time, "Don't let him hide it." Her voice, though faint, carried the urgency of her understanding. She could sense the tension rising in the room, though most adults remained unaware. It was a silent race against time, a quiet revelation building toward an inevitable moment of acknowledgement. The guardian felt their breath catch. Could it really be happening? Could a child's whispered observation influence a trial? They watched as the officer communicated with the K-9 handler through subtle gestures, aligning the handler's focus with the child's observation. The dog, sensing the guidance, shifted subtly, nostrils flaring, muscles coiled. A single, trained alert from the dog could confirm what the girl had whispered, changing the course of events in the courtroom dramatically. For a moment, the girl's observation seemed almost magical, a collision of intuition, innocence, and acute perception. Her small body trembled slightly, but her mind remained sharp, alert, and precise. She observed, calculated, and whispered, bridging the gap between the invisible signals the dog detected and the procedural world of the courtroom. Her awareness, her whisper, and the dog's instinct were converging into a moment that would soon shock everyone present. The courtroom's hum of activity continued, yet the tension at the back of the room was palpable. The K-9's body was taut, the handler's attention focused, and the officer had shifted closer, acknowledging the potential importance of the child's observation. The little girl, small and quiet, leaned slightly forward again, whispering almost under her breath, "It's there, I saw it, he can't hide it." Her words, though faint, were laden with certainty, a certainty that could not be dismissed by adults accustomed to formal evidence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity in the little girl's perception, the handler nodded subtly to the officer, acknowledging the significance of the whisper. The K-9 moved with purpose, its nose leading the way toward the exact spot the child had indicated. The guardian's heart raced, a mixture of fear, pride, and anticipation. The courtroom continued obliviously, but at the back, a quiet, small voice had set in motion a chain of events that would soon erupt into a moment no one would forget. In that instant, the little girl realized that her whisper, small, soft, almost lost in the vastness of the courtroom, carried weight far beyond her years. She had pointed, she had observed, and she had spoken. Now all that remained was the acknowledgement, the confirmation, the moment when adults would finally see what she had seen all along. She whispered once more, a soft but urgent exclamation. "He can't hide it, the dog knows." Little girl's whisper had done more than flutter into the air. It had stirred something in her guardian. They could no longer ignore what they had just heard. Their heart raced as 1,000 thoughts collided. Could a child really perceive something critical that trained adults had missed? Was it simply imagination, or was this truly a moment of rare insight? The intensity in the child's hazel eyes, the unwavering focus, the urgency behind her words, it all combined to create a force the guardian could not overlook. Gently but with deliberate urgency, the guardian nudged the child, lowering their voice so that only she could hear. "Listen," they whispered, "you're going to help me, okay? But you have to be very quiet and calm. Just tell me what you see and I'll help you make them listen." The little girl nodded, a mixture of apprehension and excitement in her eyes. Her hands, small and trembling, gripped the edges of her backpack, ready to act under her guardian's guidance. The courtroom remained largely unaware of the small storm brewing at its back. Lawyers argued quietly with each other, consulting notes, flicking through folders. The judge's voice rang out periodically, maintaining control over proceedings, though there were brief pauses as the attendees leaned forward in anticipation of witness testimonies. The defendant shifted in his seat, glancing occasionally toward the back, unconsciously sensing something amiss, though he could not pinpoint it. The K-9, however, remained focused and alert, standing sentinel beside its handler, a silent observer to the events quietly unfolding around it. The guardian leaned slightly closer to the child and whispered a plan. "I'm going to get one of the officers over here. You just point and tell them what you see. Can you do that?" The girl's small hand shot out instinctively, pointing directly at the K-9, her fingers trembling only slightly. She whispered again, soft but urgent. "It's there. The dog smells it, he touched it." Her voice carried the same calm conviction she had possessed all along, but now there was an additional weight, the gravity of a plan taking shape, a bridge forming between her perception and the adult world. The guardian rose slightly from their seat, careful not to draw attention. They scanned the room, their eyes landing on one of the officers stationed near the wall. A man in his 40s, tall and steady, with a calm demeanor that came from years of experience, was observing the proceedings with quiet vigilance. The guardian took a subtle step toward him, lowering their voice even further. "Excuse me," they whispered. "I need to show you something important." The officer turned, raising an eyebrow at the unusual approach from a civilian in the courtroom. The guardian's words tumbled out carefully, urgently trying to capture the gravity of the situation without causing alarm. "It's my daughter. She noticed something. I know it sounds strange, but she saw something about the K9 and the defendant. You need to watch her, please." The officer's brow furrowed slightly in skepticism. Children, after all, often misinterpret events. Yet there was something in the guardian's voice, a mixture of fear and certainty, that made the officer pause. Something about the weight of their insistence and the unusual intensity of their gaze demanded attention. Meanwhile, the little girl remained still, her eyes locked on the K9. She understood in the most instinctive way that the adults were now paying attention, and she felt a thrill of responsibility. She leaned slightly forward and whispered just enough for her guardian and the officer to hear. "It's there. He's hiding it. The dog knows." Each word was deliberate, precise, a bridge between her intuition and the trained perception of law enforcement. She had no fear now, only a focused determination to ensure that what she had observed was acknowledged. The officer, now bending slightly toward the guardian, motioned for discretion. "Show me," he whispered back. The guardian nodded, glancing at the little girl who was ready and waiting. Together they approached the officer, moving just enough to draw his attention to the small figure at the back of the room without disturbing the formal proceedings. The courtroom, oblivious, continued as lawyers debated quietly. The judge called for documents, and the defendant adjusted his suit anxiously. But at the back, a quiet, extraordinary drama was unfolding. The little girl, guided by her guardian's subtle instructions, pointed deliberately at the K9 and then at a small section of the room near the defendant's table. She whispered the same phrase again, now more confidently than ever. "He touched it. The dog smells it. He's hiding it there." The officer studied the child carefully. Her voice was calm, measured, and her eyes burned with intensity. This was no child's fantasy. It was a precise observation delivered with the unwavering confidence of someone who truly saw the truth. The officer nodded subtly, his instincts telling him to act, but the courtroom rules demanded discretion. He bent slightly, signaling the K9 handler without drawing attention. The handler's eyes flicked toward the child, curiosity piqued by the adult's subtle gestures. He observed the girl for a moment. The quiet intensity, the repeated gestures, the way she pointed with precision, and then looked at his dog. The K9, ever alert, responded to its handler's cues while also maintaining its own awareness of the room. The alignment of the child, the officer, and the dog began to create a chain reaction that would soon become undeniable. The little girl whispered again, almost to herself, but loud enough for the officer to catch. "Don't let him hide it. He touched it. The dog knows." Her words carried authority beyond her years, a sense of inevitability, a quiet force that seemed to ripple outward from her small frame. The guardian watched with a mixture of awe and anxiety. Could a child really influence a legal proceeding in such a direct way? Yet the evidence of the child's insight was now visible in the dog's alert posture and the adult's careful attention. The officer moved closer, signaling to the handler in subtle gestures that they should investigate the area the child had indicated. The K9's muscles tensed, nostrils flaring slightly, ears flicking in response to the heightened focus. The courtroom continued its routine, unaware that a quiet yet pivotal investigation was about to unfold. The little girl, chest heaving slightly with excitement and nervousness, whispered again, "It's there. I saw him touch it. The dog smells it." Her certainty was absolute. The alignment of her observation with the K9's instinct left no room for doubt. The guardian whispered encouragement to the girl, feeling their own pulse quicken. "You're doing great," they said softly. "Just show them." The little girl nodded, eyes never leaving the K9, aware that the connection between her observation and the dog's instincts was the key. Her finger trembled slightly as she pointed toward the exact spot where the missing evidence was hidden, her awareness of every detail almost supernatural in its precision. The officer nodded again, signaling the handler to begin a subtle investigation. The K9 moved with trained precision, sniffing the air, muscles coiled and ready. The handler, observing the child's guidance and the officer's gestures, adjusted the dog's path slightly, aligning its focus with the tiny, determined observer. Each step the dog took reinforced the child's observation. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, tension, and the weight of the unseen truth waiting to be uncovered. The guardian felt a mixture of anxiety and pride, aware that the child's insight had initiated a chain reaction that could change the course of the trial. The little girl's whisper echoed faintly in the guardian's mind as the K9 approached the area she had indicated. "He can't hide it, the dog knows." Each word resonated with certainty. The child understood instinctively that her observation was accurate, that the invisible truth she had perceived was about to be revealed through the collaboration of her intuition and the trained senses of the K9. She watched, heart pounding, as the dog's nose traced the air near the exact spot she had identified. As the K9 froze, tail stiffened, nostrils flared, and paws planted firmly, the handler knew something significant had been detected. The officer observed carefully, noting the alignment between the child's observation and the dog's trained instincts. The guardian's heart raced. The courtroom continued its mundane operations around them, oblivious to the drama unfolding at the back, yet the quiet tension was palpable to those involved. In that small space, the alignment of observation, instinct, and authority converged toward a pivotal moment. Finally, the child whispered one last time, softly but with complete certainty, "It's there. I saw him. He can't hide it." The guardian nodded, their hand gently resting on her shoulder, reassuring her that she had done everything right. The officer stepped closer to the handler, ready to act on the signal. The K9, already poised with detection, confirmed through body language the presence of what the child had noticed. In an instant, the invisible became tangible, and the courtroom, still oblivious, was on the verge of an eruption of truth. The little girl, sitting quietly, had done something extraordinary. She had bridged the gap between intuition and trained instinct, between observation and law enforcement. Her whispers, soft but unwavering, had drawn attention to something hidden, something crucial. The guardian watched with awe, realizing that the child's perception had not only identified a critical clue, but had also initiated a sequence of events that would soon alter the course of the trial dramatically. The courtroom buzz carried on like a distant hum, irrelevant to the drama unfolding at the back. The little girl's attention never wavered. Her finger still pointed subtly toward the corner near the defendant's table, and her hazel eyes, wide and unblinking, tracked every movement of the K9. The guardian stood nearby, tense yet silent, fully aware of the magnitude of the moment. Everything depended on a delicate balance of instinct, observation, and timing. The officer signaled discreetly to the K9 handler, who bent slightly to confer in hushed tones. The handler was experienced, years of training, countless scenarios, but even he had to admit, seeing a child guide a dog with such accuracy was unusual. Yet there was no denying the alignment between the girl's gestures and the K9's reactions. The dog's body language, ears pricked, tail stiff, muscles coiled, mirrored exactly what the child had been observing all along. The handler's brow furrowed slightly in concentration. He decided to test the dog, not out of disbelief, but to verify the child's observations in a controlled manner. He whispered a command, subtle and precise, instructing the K9 to approach the area near the defendant's table while maintaining its trained restraint. The dog obeyed, moving with methodical caution, nostrils twitching as it scanned the air. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated, yet instinctively reactive to faint traces invisible to human perception. The courtroom, absorbed in routine, remained blissfully unaware of the quiet suspense building behind them. The little girl leaned slightly forward, her lips moving in another soft whisper to her guardian. "He's here, it's there, I saw him." The words were simple, yet the urgency behind them was palpable. Her mind worked in an unusual way for her age, connecting subtle human behaviors, instinctive canine reactions, and hidden physical clues into a cohesive understanding. To her, this was obvious. To the adults, it was extraordinary. The K9 handler, aware of the child's presence, allowed her to continue observing. He had learned long ago that animals could sometimes detect what humans could not, and he realized that perhaps this child, with her keen observational skills, was adding another layer of awareness to the investigation. The officer nodded subtly, indicating he trusted the handler's judgment, and the dog continued its slow, purposeful investigation. As the K9 approached the corner the child had indicated, it paused, nostrils flaring sharply. The handler's hand tightened subtly on the leash, and the dog's body stiffened completely. The guardian felt their chest tighten. Every instinct screamed that the dog had detected something critical. The little girl leaned forward slightly, whispering almost reverently, "It's there, he can't hide it, the dog knows." The words carried clarity, certainty, and a quiet forcefulness that seemed impossible for someone her age. The K9's tail began a subtle wag of tension, a sign the handler recognized immediately as an alert. This was no casual sniff. It was a deliberate detection. The dog had picked up a faint scent, invisible to all human senses, something directly tied to the missing or hidden evidence. The courtroom's mundane hum seemed to fade into the background, irrelevant and distant. The tension at the back of the room, between the child, the guardian, the officer, and the handler, became a silent symphony of focus and anticipation. The handler knelt slightly, his hand firm on the leash, whispering a quiet confirmation to the officer. "He's reacting, there's something here." The officer's gaze shifted between the child and the dog. The alignment was uncanny. The child had observed a subtle movement, a hint, a trace invisible to adults. Now the dog's trained instincts confirmed it. This convergence of child perception and professional training was rare, almost unbelievable, yet undeniable. The little girl's lips moved again in another whispered repetition. "I saw him touch it, it's there. The dog knows." Her words were no longer simply observation. They were instruction, urging the adults to trust the alignment between instinct and awareness. The guardian squeezed her hand gently, aware that the child was performing something extraordinary, guiding adults and a K9 with intuition and precision. The K9 handler, cautious but decisive, began a careful search, moving the dog slowly along the indicated area. The dog's nose led the way, its body language communicating each minor discovery. The courtroom remained unaware of the drama at the back, oblivious to the tiny figure whose quiet observation had initiated this crucial investigation. Lawyers continued their procedural debates, the judge called for notes, and spectators shifted in their seats, entirely disconnected from the invisible story unfolding. As the dog's movements continued, it suddenly froze completely. Its tail stiffened, its head lifted sharply, nostrils quivering as it focused on a precise spot near the base of the defendant's table. The handler tensed, his eyes narrowing. He whispered softly to the officer, "It's here, something, buried or hidden. I can't see it yet, but the dog knows exactly where." The guardian's pulse raced. The child's whisper had led to this moment. Her quiet observation had guided trained adults and a highly skilled K9 to detect what had been hidden from plain sight. The little girl leaned slightly, pointing directly at the spot. Her small hand trembled only slightly, but her eyes burned with certainty. "He touched it, it's there, he can't hide it." Her voice carried an authority no one in the room could have predicted. Every adult present, guided by the dog's reaction and the child's precision, began to sense that something extraordinary was about to be revealed. The K9 handler now moved cautiously to examine the spot more closely. The dog remained still, alert and focused, communicating silently through body language and subtle movements. The officer prepared to step in, carefully coordinating with the handler to maintain courtroom protocol. Every second stretched, the tension almost unbearable. The courtroom continued as normal, oblivious to the convergence of child observation, canine instinct, and professional oversight that was about to expose the hidden truth. The little girl whispered again, softer this time but with unwavering intensity. "It's right there. I saw him, the dog knows." Her intuition had guided the handler to the exact location, and now all that remained was confirmation. The guardian leaned in slightly, whispering encouragement. "It's okay, you're doing amazing." The child nodded subtly, eyes never leaving the dog. She understood instinctively that the final confirmation was imminent. The K9, guided by its instincts, indicated with a series of precise gestures the exact spot where the object was hidden. Its stance, posture, and subtle pawing communicated clearly to the handler that this was no ordinary detection. It was a confirmed alert. The officer observed, noting the precise alignment between the child's initial observation, the dog's trained instincts, and the handler's careful guidance. This was extraordinary. Finally, the handler bent slightly, following the dog's indications, and uncovered a small, concealed item, the missing piece of evidence the child had whispered about repeatedly. The officer's eyes widened. The little girl's lips parted in a whisper of triumph. "I told you he can't hide it," the dog knew. Her voice was soft, yet it carried the resonance of truth fulfilled. The courtroom, still largely unaware, was about to witness the ripple effect of this quiet, extraordinary event. The guardian squeezed the child's hand in pride, unable to contain their awe. The little girl, small and seemingly insignificant to the formal proceedings, had guided trained professionals and a highly skilled K9 to uncover a hidden truth. The alignment of instinct, observation, and calm precision had produced a moment of revelation no adult had anticipated. At that instant, the courtroom's attention began to shift subtly as murmurs arose. An object had been discovered. Lawyers and spectators began to notice, whispers spreading through the room. The judge's voice rang out, calling for order, but the tension had shifted. The quiet, extraordinary actions at the back of the room, the child's whispered guidance, the guardian's cautious intervention, the officer's attentiveness, and the K9's trained detection, were about to erupt into acknowledgement and astonishment. The little girl sat back slightly, eyes still fixed on the K9, a mixture of relief and satisfaction in her expression. Her small whisper had set off a chain reaction that no adult alone could have orchestrated. The guardian, aware of the gravity of the moment, whispered gently, "You did it, you helped them see it." The child's lips curved in a quiet, triumphant smile. She understood instinctively the power of observation, intuition, and courage, even from someone so small. The K9's alert had led to undeniable discovery, confirming what the child had observed all along. The courtroom now began to recognize that something extraordinary had occurred. A small voice, a keen eye, and a trained dog had converged to reveal a truth that had remained hidden, unnoticed by the adults until this remarkable sequence of events unfolded. The tension, anticipation, and suspense that had built quietly at the back were finally ready to ripple through the room. The courtroom, which had seemed like a mundane theater of legal procedure just moments ago, began to shift subtly, though no one could have predicted the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Whispered murmurs rippled through the rows of spectators as a small, inconspicuous item was revealed at the back of the room. Lawyers paused mid-sentence, papers trembling in their hands. The judge, focused on procedural matters moments ago, raised an eyebrow in sudden curiosity. Something had changed. The invisible thread of tension that had silently coiled throughout the courtroom was snapping into motion. The officer stationed at the back quickly moved closer to the K9 handler, signaling discreetly that the dog had confirmed detection of a hidden object. The guardian's heart raced in their chest. Their eyes flicked to the little girl, who remained surprisingly calm despite the chaos that was about to erupt around her. Her small hands gripped the edge of her seat, fingers tight but steady. Her hazel eyes, intense and unwavering, never left the dog or the area where the object had been hidden. She had observed this long before the adults had any inkling, and now the court was about to recognize the truth she had quietly insisted upon. The K-9, trained to indicate without alarming the public, subtly pawed at the spot, nostrils flaring, body tense with focus. The handler followed the cues precisely, bending slightly and gently reaching toward the object. The courtroom's hum continued, but a ripple of curiosity had begun to spread. Observers in the front rows glanced backward, sensing the disruption in the usual rhythm of proceedings. The child's whisper had ignited a chain reaction that no one yet fully comprehended, yet its effects were becoming impossible to ignore. Then it happened. The object was lifted, small yet unmistakably significant, and the reality of its presence caused the courtroom to shift from procedural monotony to stunned attention. A murmur surged through the spectators as cameras flashed and reporters leaned forward, scrambling to capture the unexpected turn. The judge, momentarily taken aback, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, voice firm but tinged with astonishment. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked sharply, eyes sweeping the room for explanation. The officer gestured subtly toward the child and her guardian, nodding to indicate the chain of observation that had led to the discovery. The courtroom froze. All attention, suddenly and inevitably, shifted to the back. The little girl, small and seemingly insignificant just moments ago, had become the center of an unfolding revelation. Spectators leaned in, whispers growing louder. How had this child known what the adults could not? How had she guided trained professionals and a K-9 to uncover something hidden? The guardian felt a mixture of awe and nervous pride. They knew the child had observed carefully, had whispered softly but insistently, and had guided the adults with intuition that bordered on uncanny. Now, all the careful whispers, all the pointing and subtle gestures, were culminating in a moment that none of the adults could ignore. The courtroom's usual order, the scripted exchanges and formalities, had been disrupted by the precision of a child's perception. Lawyers hurried toward the back, curiosity mixed with a professional need to understand the implications. The defendant shifted uneasily, glancing toward the back of the room, sensing that the equilibrium of the trial had changed. His confident facade faltered slightly as whispers grew louder and attention focused squarely on the little girl, the K-9, and the object revealed. The K-9 handler remained calm, trained instincts guiding every subtle movement. Yet even he could not hide a faint recognition of the extraordinary circumstances that had unfolded. The little girl's whisper, almost drowned in the rising volume of the courtroom, was still audible to her guardian. "I told you he can't hide it," she murmured softly, as if reassuring herself as much as anyone else. The words, though faint, carried the weight of truth confirmed. Her eyes met her guardian's briefly, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. Observation and intuition had bridged the adult world of procedure with a child's pure perception, and now the results were undeniable. The judge finally regained composure, tapping his gavel lightly but with authority. "Order in the court," he bellowed, voice cutting through the murmurs. Yet even as he attempted to restore formal control, the room's focus had irreversibly shifted. Attention was no longer on routine proceedings or procedural debates. It was on the little girl, the guardian, the officer, the K-9, and the revealed object. The courtroom had erupted quietly at first, and now the eruption became full, a wave of astonishment, murmurs, and incredulity sweeping from the back rows to the front. Reporters, sensing the unfolding story, began clicking cameras and scribbling notes. Lawyers whispered urgently to one another, speculating about how a child's observation could intersect so precisely with professional detection and law enforcement procedure. Even the defendant, previously confident and composed, now fidgeted in his seat, realizing that the chain of events he had overlooked or underestimated was now the centerpiece of the courtroom's attention. The officer took a careful step forward, subtly nodding to the handler and indicating that the child's observation had been instrumental. He spoke quietly to the judge. "Your Honor, the discovery of this object was directly influenced by the observation of this young girl. The K-9's alert confirmed her indication. The courtroom collectively froze at the acknowledgement. A child had played a critical role in uncovering hidden evidence, guiding trained adults and a professional detection dog. The judge leaned back slightly, absorbing the statement. His expression was a mix of surprise and curiosity. Are you saying a child, through observation and guidance, contributed to the location of evidence critical to this case? His voice carried both incredulity and cautious acknowledgement of the unprecedented scenario. The courtroom murmured again, the ripple of astonishment growing louder. The little girl's whispered words, once quiet and almost invisible, had triggered a domino effect that now dominated the attention of every adult present. The guardian stood quietly, proud yet tense, aware that their child's observations had transformed the dynamic of the courtroom. They squeezed her hand gently, whispering reassurance. "You did amazing, everyone sees it now." The child's lips curved slightly, a quiet smile of satisfaction and triumph. Her eyes, still focused on the K-9 and the revealed object, reflected the intensity of someone who had known the truth all along, yet waited patiently for the adults to catch up. The K-9, trained to remain calm amidst chaos, now shifted subtly, tail wagging slightly in measured excitement, nostrils still flaring. Its handler allowed the dog a brief pause, a moment of acknowledgement that the objective had been achieved. Yet the handler, even in his experience, could not suppress a faint recognition of the extraordinary nature of the situation. A child's observation, perfectly aligned with canine instincts, had altered the course of proceedings. The murmurs grew louder, and whispers turned into audible conversation among the spectators and reporters. Questions circulated. How had the child noticed the hidden object? How had her subtle guidance led trained professionals and a detection dog directly to it? Could a child possess such perceptive skill, such precision of observation at such a young age? The courtroom's usual hierarchy of authority, based on experience and expertise, had been disrupted by the purity of observation and the instinctive intelligence of a child. The defendant, now fully aware of the implications, shifted uneasily. His attempts to maintain composure faltered as the chain of observation, detection, and confirmation culminated in undeniable revelation. Whispers of shock spread among his legal team, and the judge, though still composed in demeanor, began to adjust proceedings in light of the extraordinary circumstances. Evidence had been found, confirmed by both professional instinct and intuitive observation, and the room collectively acknowledged the pivotal role of a child who had quietly, persistently, and accurately guided the process. The little girl, small and seemingly inconsequential, had become the focal point of a courtroom eruption, not through spectacle or theatrics, but through precise observation and quiet insistence. Every adult present, from the judge to the spectators, had witnessed an event that defied conventional expectations. A child had guided professional authorities and a trained K-9 to uncover hidden evidence, altering the course of proceedings through intuition, observation, and courage. The guardian exhaled quietly, aware that the child's extraordinary perception had not only revealed hidden evidence but had also shifted the dynamic of the courtroom entirely. They whispered softly, "You made them see it, you were right." The child's hazel eyes met their gaze, calm yet triumphant. "I knew," she whispered back. Her certainty, once quiet and almost invisible, had been validated beyond doubt. The courtroom had erupted, not in chaos, but in astonishment, awe, and recognition. A child's whisper, once subtle, had grown into a revelation that could not be ignored. Lawyers, officers, reporters, and spectators alike recognized that an extraordinary chain of observation, intuition, and trained instinct had unfolded before them. The quiet eruption at the back of the room had transformed the courtroom into a space where the unexpected and extraordinary became undeniable. The courtroom had erupted, a wave of astonishment sweeping through the room, yet the real climax was only beginning. The judge, now fully aware of the extraordinary circumstances, leaned forward in his chair, eyes narrowing as he took in the little girl, the guardian, the officer, and the K-9. Every head in the room had turned toward them. The air vibrated with tension. Whispers mingled with audible gasps as everyone tried to comprehend what had just occurred. A child had discovered hidden evidence that had eluded trained adults. The defendant's face paled slightly as he realized that his carefully constructed composure was cracking under the weight of undeniable exposure. His lawyers exchanged anxious glances, suddenly unsure of how to contain the situation. They had relied on procedural mastery, legal strategy, and confident assertion, yet all of that had been upended by the quiet insistence of a child. The room, filled with professional adults, was forced to confront the extraordinary. A child's observation, combined with a K-9's trained instincts, had revealed a hidden truth. The officer stepped slightly forward, his calm authority cutting through the murmurs. "Your Honor," he said, his voice measured but firm, "the evidence discovered at the back of the courtroom was hidden deliberately. The child's observations, combined with the K-9's alert, directly led to this discovery. We believe it is crucial to the case." The judge's brow furrowed, not in doubt but in recognition of the rare circumstances. He tapped his gavel lightly, restoring a semblance of order. All eyes shifted to the little girl. She sat calmly, small hands clasped in her lap, eyes steady and focused. The courtroom seemed to shrink around her, as if the vast space had become a stage for her quiet triumph. Spectators leaned forward, reporters scribbled notes furiously, and even the defendant could not look away. She had observed, whispered, and pointed with precision, guiding trained adults and a K-9 to a hidden truth. Every adult in the room now acknowledged her extraordinary role, though none fully understood how a child could perceive so accurately. The guardian, standing quietly by her side, whispered reassurance. "You did it, you made them see it." The little girl's lips curved in a faint smile. She understood the power of observation, intuition, and patience. She had waited, watched, and acted at the perfect moment, and now the consequences of her actions were unfolding before her. The guardian's pride was tempered by anxiety. What would come next? How would the court handle this revelation? The K-9 handler knelt near the discovered evidence, allowing the dog a moment of quiet acknowledgement. The animal's posture relaxed slightly, tail wagging in measured rhythm, nostrils still twitching from the residual scent. The handler's eyes met the officer's, a silent communication passing between them. Both recognized that the child had not merely been present, she had actively guided the discovery. The alignment between her observation and the dog's trained instincts was rare, nearly unprecedented. The judge raised his gavel again, this time with a voice that carried authority and acknowledgement. "This court recognizes the discovery of critical evidence through unconventional means. The involvement of a minor, while unusual, has proven significant and verifiable. We must proceed with careful consideration, but the weight of this evidence is clear." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom once more, blending astonishment with curiosity. How could a child play such a decisive role in a legal proceeding? The defendant shifted nervously, realizing that the quiet confidence he had relied upon was crumbling. His eyes flicked toward the little girl, noting the calm, unwavering certainty in her gaze. Every whisper she had made, every subtle gesture, had culminated in the exposure of his hidden act. His legal team began a quiet debate, trying to manage the impact of the revelation, but the courtroom's attention was no longer on procedural arguments. It was on the truth now laid bare. The little girl leaned slightly forward, whispering again to her guardian, though her words carried more to the room than she might have realized. "It's done, they see it now." Her tone was calm but triumphant, a quiet assertion of justice achieved through perception and persistence. The guardian nodded subtly, squeezing her hand in acknowledgement. Together, they had orchestrated, through observation and subtle guidance, a moment that would be remembered long after the trial concluded. The officer approached the front of the courtroom, holding the evidence carefully. "Your Honor," he said, "this item was hidden intentionally. The K-9's alert, combined with the child's precise observation, has verified its location. We request that it be formally acknowledged and introduced into the case record." The judge's eyes swept the room, absorbing the reactions of lawyers, spectators, and reporters. Every adult in the room was now confronting a rare truth. A child had played a pivotal role in the administration of justice. The courtroom erupted once again, this time in audible acknowledgement. Spectators whispered excitedly, reporters jostled to capture the story, and lawyers debated quietly in astonishment. Even the defendant's composure faltered further as he realized the full consequences of the child's observations. The air was thick with tension, disbelief, and a sense of extraordinary events colliding with ordinary procedure. Every adult present recognized that the little girl's perception had shifted the balance of the trial. The K-9 handler carefully stepped aside, allowing the officer to manage the presentation of evidence. The dog remained alert, nostrils twitching, ears pricked, sensing the heightened tension. Its trained instincts had guided the discovery, but the child had initiated the process. Her quiet observations, whispered instructions, and precise pointing had bridged the gap between intuition and professional detection. Together, human and animal, adult and child, had revealed a truth that could not be ignored. The guardian whispered softly to the child, "You helped make this right." The little girl's eyes met hers, calm and focused, yet sparkling with quiet triumph. "I just saw it," she replied, as if that simple act of observation had carried the weight of destiny. Her words, small and unassuming, held an authority that resonated through the courtroom. Every adult present could sense the alignment of perception, instinct, and truth. The judge called for silence, tapping the gavel once more. "We will now proceed with the formal acknowledgement of the evidence," he announced. "The court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances, the minor's observation, and the verification through trained professionals. Let it be entered into the record." Murmurs erupted once more, but now tempered with awe and respect. The courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary, a rare intersection of childlike perception, adult training, and the pursuit of justice. The defendant's legal team protested quietly, but their words lacked the force to challenge what had been revealed. The weight of the child's observation, the K-9's detection, and the officer's confirmation was undeniable. Every adult present now understood that the child had played a critical role in ensuring justice. The air in the room, once tense with procedural expectation, now thrummed with a sense of resolution, revelation, and the extraordinary impact of a single, perceptive observer. The little girl leaned back slightly, hands folded in her lap, calm but triumphant. She had observed, whispered, and guided. Now the truth was undeniable. The courtroom, initially skeptical and procedural, had been forced to recognize the power of perception, courage, and quiet insistence. The guardian exhaled slowly, aware that the child had accomplished something remarkable, not just in the legal sense, but in demonstrating that insight and attention could transcend age and experience. The K-9, still alert but relaxed, moved subtly closer to its handler, as if acknowledging the completion of its task. The child's gaze remained steady, observing the interaction with quiet satisfaction. She had been the catalyst, the unseen guide, the bridge between hidden truth and public acknowledgement. Every adult present had been drawn into her observation, their actions guided by her quiet insistence, and the courtroom had erupted, not in chaos, but in recognition of the extraordinary truth revealed. As the evidence was formally introduced and the courtroom began to regain procedural order, whispers continued. Spectators exchanged incredulous glances, reporters scribbled notes frantically, and lawyers recalibrated their strategies in light of the revelation. The little girl's quiet bravery and perceptive skill had not only altered the course of the trial, but had also left an indelible impression on everyone present. The tension had peaked, the truth had been revealed, and the courtroom had collectively acknowledged the remarkable role of a perceptive child. The guardian knelt briefly beside her, whispering softly, "You changed everything, you made them see." The child's eyes sparkled with quiet triumph. "I just wanted them to see the truth," she replied. Her voice, soft but resonant with certainty, echoed the power of observation, intuition, and the courage to act. The courtroom, now fully aware, had been forever altered by her quiet, unwavering guidance. The judge adjusted his glasses, observing the alignment of reactions throughout the room. The evidence had been revealed, the defendant's composure had faltered, and every adult had been confronted with an extraordinary truth. The little girl had not only guided the process, she had catalyzed the acknowledgement of hidden reality. The courtroom had erupted in astonishment, tension had peaked, and the extraordinary had unfolded with precision, courage, and clarity. The courtroom, which had erupted moments ago with astonishment and tension, began to settle into a rare, quiet reverence. Every adult present, lawyers, officers, spectators, and the judge himself, had been forced to witness an extraordinary convergence of intuition, observation, and trained expertise. The little girl, small and unassuming, had become the catalyst for uncovering hidden truth, guiding the K-9 and professional adults with the precision of someone far beyond her years. The revelation had reached its peak, and now the weight of consequences began to settle across the room. The defendant slumped slightly in his chair, the confident composure he had relied upon completely shattered. His lawyers whispered urgently, trying to salvage what remained of credibility, but it was clear that the scales of justice had shifted irrevocably. The hidden object, discovered through a combination of child observation and canine alert, had provided undeniable evidence of his wrongdoing. There was no longer room for denial, evasion, or clever maneuvering. The courtroom now recognized the convergence of truth and perception, and there would be no turning back. The judge, a figure of authority who had seen countless cases, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, voice steady but tinged with recognition. "This court acknowledges the extraordinary role played by the minor present here," he said, gesturing toward the little girl. "Her observations, combined with professional K-9 detection, have directly led to the discovery of critical evidence. Let it be known that her actions have not only assisted in the administration of justice, but have also demonstrated the power of observation and courage, regardless of age." The courtroom fell silent for a moment, absorbing the significance of the statement. Spectators whispered softly, some with awe, others with disbelief. Reporters furiously documented every detail, aware that they had witnessed an event that defied conventional expectations. The little girl's quiet presence had fundamentally altered the trajectory of the case, and every adult present understood that her role would be remembered as extraordinary. The officer who had coordinated with the K-9 stepped forward, nodding respectfully toward the child. "Your observations were precise, accurate, and instrumental in uncovering evidence that might have otherwise remained hidden. The court is grateful for your contribution." The little girl's lips curved slightly, a quiet smile reflecting satisfaction and pride. Her eyes, bright and focused, mirrored the calm assurance of someone who had long known the truth and patiently guided others to it. The guardian knelt briefly beside her, whispering softly. "You helped make things right," they said, voice filled with quiet pride. The little girl looked up, meeting their gaze, and responded simply, "I just wanted them to see what was real." Her words, small and unassuming, carried the weight of an unwavering moral clarity. The courtroom had witnessed the extraordinary power of perception, the courage to act, and the quiet authority of truth spoken without fear. Lawyers for the prosecution began to reorganize their presentation, incorporating the newly discovered evidence. The object, now formally entered into the case record, transformed the dynamics of argument and strategy. The defendant's legal team struggled to adjust, their previous confidence replaced by growing anxiety. Every gesture, every statement, now had to contend with the undeniable reality that had been revealed. A child's keen observation had exposed the hidden truth, validated by the professional instincts of a K-9 and the careful oversight of law enforcement. The judge called the courtroom to order once more, tapping the gavel with quiet authority. "Let this case proceed with full acknowledgement of the evidence now presented. The actions of the minor, verified by trained professionals, will be taken into account in the considerations before this court." Murmurs continued, but softened into attentive silence. The courtroom was collectively aware that an extraordinary lesson had unfolded. Truth could emerge in unexpected ways, and courage and observation often transcended age and experience. The little girl, still seated, observed the renewed proceedings with calm focus. Her actions had set a ripple of consequences into motion, altering the course of the trial and compelling every adult present to acknowledge her role. The K9, lying quietly beside its handler, seemed to exude a calm satisfaction, as if aware that its instincts had complemented the child's perception perfectly. The alignment between human intuition and trained instinct had created a synergy that none in the room could ignore. Spectators leaned forward, whispering in quiet astonishment. "Did you see that?" one murmured. "A child actually guided the dog to find the evidence." Another whispered, "I've never seen anything like this in my life." The room was alive with quiet reflection on the extraordinary nature of the events. The little girl had demonstrated that observation, courage, and a calm, discerning eye could pierce through deception and reveal hidden truths. The defendant, realizing the gravity of the situation, finally looked down, his shoulders slumping in defeat. His attempts to maintain control had collapsed under the undeniable evidence now laid bare. The courtroom's attention, which had briefly wavered with procedural interruptions, was now singularly focused on the consequences of truth revealed. The child, small and unassuming, had become the pivotal figure in restoring justice. The guardian whispered quietly to her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "You've shown them all how important seeing the truth is. You've done something remarkable." The little girl's lips curved in a subtle, contented smile. "I didn't do it alone," she said softly. "The dog helped me, the people listened. We all saw it together." Her humility, combined with the precision of her actions, reinforced the lesson that courage and perception, no matter how small the observer, could create extraordinary impact. The K9 handler spoke briefly, addressing the judge in courtroom. "Your Honor, the dog's training allowed for detection, but it was the child's keen observation and guidance that directed us precisely to the concealed evidence. This rare collaboration demonstrates the potential of intuition, experience, and observation working in tandem." The courtroom absorbed the statement, understanding the unprecedented nature of the moment. A child, a dog, and trained adults had collectively restored justice. The judge nodded slowly, acknowledging the statement and its implications. This court recognizes that justice has been served not solely by professional authority, but also through the extraordinary perceptiveness and moral courage of a minor. Let this serve as a reminder that truth often emerges through unexpected channels, and that integrity and observation can come from any age. The courtroom, now hushed with reflective acknowledgement, seemed to exhale collectively, absorbing the weight of the lesson. As the trial resumed with the newly introduced evidence, the tension in the room shifted from suspense to resolution. Lawyers argued with renewed clarity, the defendant's team struggled to counter undeniable facts, and spectators watched in awe at the unfolding administration of justice. Yet throughout the renewed proceedings, the central figure, the little girl, remained quiet, her eyes bright with focus but calm in demeanor. She had guided, revealed, and inspired, and now she observed the consequences of her actions with mature composure. The officer nodded subtly to the K9 handler, acknowledging the extraordinary collaboration that had occurred. The dog, still alert but relaxed, seemed to recognize its role in a moment that would be remembered. Human intuition, animal instinct, and childlike observation had intersected in a singular act of revelation, creating a narrative that no procedural formality could diminish. Every adult present understood the rarity of what had transpired. As the day progressed, the courtroom began to see the broader implications of the event. Journalists would recount the story for months, legal scholars would analyze it for its unprecedented nature, and the ordinary observers, spectators and participants alike, would remember the quiet courage of a small child who guided adults and a dog to truth. The lesson was clear. Perception, courage, and careful attention could change the course of events in ways that authority alone could not. The little girl, still seated, allowed herself a faint smile as she watched the trial proceed. Her guardian leaned down, whispering gently, "You helped the world see the truth today." She nodded, a sense of quiet fulfillment in her expression. "I just followed what I saw," she replied softly. Her words reflected a profound lesson. Extraordinary acts often begin with simple observation, quiet courage, and a refusal to ignore the truth. By the time the trial concluded for the day, the atmosphere had shifted from disbelief and tension to respect and acknowledgement. The defendant's credibility had been irrevocably compromised, and the evidence, guided by the child and verified by trained professionals, would play a pivotal role in the eventual outcome. The courtroom had witnessed an extraordinary story of collaboration, perception, and moral courage, one that would be recounted for years to come. As the spectators departed, murmuring among themselves, the little girl remained a quiet presence at the back, observing the K-9 and the professionals who had relied on her guidance. The guardian gently took her hand, smiling proudly. "You've shown everyone how powerful seeing clearly can be," they whispered. She nodded, understanding that the quiet actions of today would resonate far beyond the walls of the courtroom. The lesson of the day was profound. Truth can emerge through unexpected channels, courage can manifest in the smallest voices, and justice is strengthened when perception, integrity, and attention are combined. The little girl, the K-9, and the adults who had listened carefully had restored justice, not only by uncovering hidden evidence, but also by demonstrating the extraordinary power of observation, courage, and collaboration. As the courtroom emptied, the judge remained at his bench, reflecting on the rare and remarkable events that had unfolded. The trial, now infused with evidence discovered in extraordinary fashion, would continue to its conclusion, but the memory of the quiet eruption, the revelation of hidden truth, and the peak of tension would linger in the minds of all who had witnessed it. A child, small in stature but immense in perception, had altered the course of justice in ways no adult could have predicted. The K-9 rested quietly, yet alert, beside its handler, its instincts having guided the discovery alongside the child's extraordinary observations. The guardianship, the observation, and the courage had converged in a moment that transcended ordinary procedure. Justice had been restored, lessons had been learned, and the extraordinary role of a perceptive child had been forever etched into the story of the day. And in the quiet aftermath, the little girl leaned slightly forward, eyes still bright, whispering softly to her guardian, "I just wanted them to see the truth, and they did." Her words, simple yet profound, echoed the heart of the day's events, a reminder that courage, perception, and quiet insistence can illuminate the darkest corners and restore balance, even in the most formal and daunting of places.